When the jungle hides an empire, the king wears silence instead of a crown. Born in 1935 in the Kokang region of what is today Myanmar's Shan state, Lo Hsing Han entered a world fractured by ethnic strife, border warlords, and political vacuum. His childhood was one of scarcity and instability, of broken roads and shifting allegiances. In that rugged terrain, control meant arms, and survival meant trade. From an early age, Lo learned that power lay not in virtue or lineage, but in connection, ruthlessness, and a commodity others craved. As the central government weakened and regional militias proliferated, Lo aligned himself with HER0IN, a state-sponsored paramilitary force set up by the regime to counter communist insurgents in the Shan Hills. Under this banner, he gained arms, local legitimacy, and a license of sorts, permission to operate in regions where the line between soldier and smuggler blurred. His militia duties masked the beginnings of a far darker enterprise. By the 1960s, Lo had begun trafficking opium. The landscape worked in his favor. Hill farmers, isolated and impoverished, saw no path to cash crops. Opium was the only exportable product. Lo's militia status granted him monopolistic advantages. He could tax production, arrange routes, and suppress competition under cover of his official role. Smugglers were no longer just independent operators. They became part of a system he controlled. His transformation from rebel to merchant of death was gradual, calculated. He trafficked opium to the Thai border, where it was refined into heroin and shipped outward. Lo consolidated control by controlling the supply chain: production, transport, bribed enforcement, and export. To outsiders, he was a commander. To insiders, he was the axis of the trade. By 1973, Lo's operation had grown enough to attract international attention. Thai authorities arrested him on foreign soil, and he was extradited to Myanmar. In Myanmar, he was charged not for trafficking, but for a brief alliance with the Shan state insurgent armies. Convicted of treason, sentenced to death, the sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. Yet even in prison, Lo remained more than a captive. He kept his network alive, and his influence never fully waned. When in 1980 he was released in a general amnesty, the empire he had built was wounded but not broken. He re-emerged, not merely as the same man, but as something stronger, one who had known both the gun and the ledger, and had used both to cement his rule. In that arc, from insurgent fighter to paramilitary warlord to the world's shadow broker, Lo Hsing Han laid the foundation of his legacy. The battlefield was just the beginning. His true weapon was opium. By the early 1970s, Lo Hsing Han had risen from local militia leader to master of one of the most notorious narcotic corridors in the world. He expanded his reach across the forbidding hills, where Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos converge. The fabled Golden Triangle, a place where borders blur, mountains hide empires, and opium becomes currency. The Golden Triangle was never just poetry or legend. It was war. In the rugged Shan state, farmers grew poppies not by choice, but by necessity. The soil was poor, the isolation total, and the cash needed to survive only obtainable through one export: opium. That crop, once harvested, followed trails through jungles, across rivers, and over mountain passes. In Lo's hands, those trails were transformed into arteries of death. With his militia roots in the HEROIN, KKY, a government-sanctioned paramilitary network meant to fight communists, Lo inherited both privilege and cover. The KKY arrangement allowed him the latitude to move opium under state tolerance. As the government turned a blind eye to the opium trade by militias it nominally controlled, Lo matured from operator to overlord. He didn't just traffic raw opium, he controlled every stage, purchasing from hill farmers, transporting raw gum or opium, refining into heroin, and distributing across borders. His caravans rolled deep into the region, passing through border checkpoints where bribery had become routine, where official complicity was unspeakable but widespread. As the Golden Triangle's networks grew more complex, so did Lo's tactics. He used corrupt police, sympathetic border guards, and ethnic militias to shield his shipments. He leveraged alliances with powerful figures and exploited the terrain's wildness to evade interdiction. Even rival lords, like Khun Sa, would have to contend with a man who saw the jungle not as wilderness, but as a canvas for control. Lo's empire was macabre in its architecture. Hidden laboratories, refineries camouflaged among bamboo and vines, processed raw opium into heroin with the help of clandestine chemists. Routes led through northern Thailand and Laos, making the Golden Triangle a launchpad for narcotics destined for Asia, the West, and beyond. His dominance was neither total nor uncontested. Rivals pushed, governments cracked down, alliances collapsed. But Lo survived by diversifying, camouflaging as a businessman, and embedding his operations within the legitimate economy. He put business fronts in place to launder wealth, to conceal the lines between legal and illicit. In that zone of extremes, Lo Hsing Han redefined power. He turned jungle trails into highways of addiction, and in doing so, he built a phantom dominion. The Golden Triangle was his realm, and he made it the world's deadliest crossroads. In August 1973, Lo Hsing Han's reign of shadows seemed to falter. In northern Thailand, he was detained by Thai authorities and handed over to the Burmese Myanmar government. The charge was not for trafficking. He had operated under tacit toleration, but for high treason and rebellion, owing to his brief alliance with the Shan State Army insurgents. The verdict was severe. Lo was sentenced to death. Yet, that sentence would not hold. Over time, it was commuted to life imprisonment. Behind bars, Lo remained more than a captive. His influence, though clipped, was never broken. When the government offered a general amnesty in 1980, he walked free. The world he re-entered had changed, but his ambition had not. He returned to the northern Shan region and began rebuilding what he had lost. From the ruins of his old networks, Lo forged new alliances. He rallied a PII Thusit, People's Militia, force to assert presence on the ground and reap protection through force. But Lo did not resurrect his empire in the same shape. He adopted a dual persona. In the light, a businessman; in the dark, a kingpin. By the early 1990s, he co-founded HER0IN, a conglomerate that took on infrastructure, port, and construction projects across Myanmar. Through this facade, he laundered influence and capital, embedding himself into the machinery of state contracts and development. Lo's return was strategic and ruthless. He re-established laboratories and supply nodes in Kokang and surrounding border areas, sometimes outpacing his rivals. His wealth soared, his political ties deepened, and his grip over both legal and illegal spheres tightened. In the end, Lo Hsing Han's incarceration had not been an interruption. It was a crucible. He toured the flames, emerged tempered, and assumed a role more durable than before. Not just a phantom in the hills, but a figure with one foot in commerce and another in crime. Through the facade of steel beams and concrete pillars, Lo Hsing Han built something far more dangerous than buildings. He built cover. In 1992, he formally launched HER0IN Company, marking his shift from warlord king to tycoon. What was once hidden in jungle labs would now flow beneath the highways and inside ports he claimed to own. To the public, he was an infrastructure magnate. HER0IN's portfolio stretched across construction, transportation, import-export, and industrial enterprises. Projects that drew praise, roads to remote borderlands, terminals at ports, development of logistics corridors, also masked his deepest business. To the state, he was a partner. Through long-standing ties with military and political elites in Myanmar, Lo's companies earned government contracts. He gained permit by permit, concession by concession, becoming enmeshed in the machinery of national development. His empire moved from outlaws to insiders, approval stamps replacing bribes, licenses replacing threats. But behind the concrete and steel, the same rivers of narcotics flowed. HER0IN and its subsidiaries served as vehicles for laundering, smoothing movement of goods and capital, and hiding the fingerprints of heroin money. The ports, the roads, the infrastructure, all became tools in a greater network of subterfuge. It was a mask of legitimacy, and it required care. He compartmentalized. On one level, HER0IN negotiated foreign investment, joint ventures, partnerships. On another, underground networks arranged precursor chemicals, lab sites, transit routes. These systems rarely crossed in public view, yet they were symbiotic behind the scenes. Of HER0IN's many assets were HER0IN Port Management and HER0IN Industries, arms through which he claimed ownership of key nodes in trade and logistics. These weren't just subsidiaries. They were strategic windows into the legal world of commerce. The US would later sanction Lo, his son Stephen Law, and HER0IN itself, citing the enterprise's historic ties to drug trafficking, money laundering, and support to the Burmese regime. The mask was not flawless. Over time, governments, intelligence agencies, and journalists peeled away layers, exposing that beneath the veneer of builder and investor was the same kingpin who trafficked heroin at scale. Lo's transformation was not abandonment of crime, it was refinement. Drugs provided raw capital. Asia World cleaned it, buried it, reinvested it into power. That duality, Shadow King and public magnate, allowed him to operate in plain sight while commanding the empire he once ran in darkness. The mask of legitimacy did not conceal him entirely, but it changed the battlefield. He no longer fought from jungle hideouts. He fought inside boardrooms, in deals, in contracts. And with that shift, his shadow grew deeper, longer, harder to dislodge. Lo Hsing Han died on July 6, 2013, in Yangon, Myanmar, at the age of about 80. His passing was met with subdued announcements, but the shadow he cast over Southeast Asia was anything but forgotten. In death, he became more than a man. He became a myth, a cautionary legend whose reputation outlived him. To Myanmar's business elite, he was a tycoon, a builder of roads and ports, a name that stood in contracts in stone. But those bridges and terminals are only half the picture, because beneath the mortar and steel, the same rivers of capital built on narcotics continue to flow, silent, hidden, untouchable. His true monument is measured not in kilometers of highway, but in the addiction he fueled, the cartels he enabled, and the billions still echoing from his era in the Golden Triangle. Even after his death, the infrastructure of drug networks he helped solidify persists, in laboratories, in cross-border routes, in financial webs. In the 2000s, the United States government blacklisted Lo Hsing Han, his son Stephen Law, and their companies, including Asia World and its arms, under sanctions citing their roles in supporting the Burmese junta money laundering and ties to narcotics trafficking. Those sanctions were symbolic barriers, meant to isolate, to stigmatize. But they could never fully sever or unravel the deep imprints he left on the region's shadow economy. His funeral, by all accounts, was a grand affair, attended by former generals, cabinet ministers, and scores of public figures, a testament to his paradoxical status, once outlaw, now insider. To many in Myanmar's corridors of power, he was not just tolerated, he was woven into the fabric of business and government. And yet, outside that precinct, his version of legacy is darker. In borderlands where governance remains weak, drug cultivation and transit still flourish, often under the aegis of networks laid in his time. In places where institutions are fragile and corruption is endemic, the rules he normalized, co-opt, bribe, operate in duality, are still the rules of the game. Lo Hsing Han's story is not one of eradication. He was never fully vanquished. His influence survived him. The lines between criminal empire and legal capitalism that he blurred have not always been redrawn. The Golden Triangle still pulses with narcotic trade and shadow capital. His footprints remain embedded there. He began as a rebel. He died as a businessman, but the world will remember him as Asia's Heroin King.